Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this last webinars of the ISAR Virtuaeolian seminar series of the for 2025. We will have uh, other talks next year, and you already have the title and the time of the next seminar in at the end of January, and we'll advertise this a bit more at the end of this presentation. So today we have the pleasure to welcome John Merrison from Aarhus University. And before I say a few words about him, I'd like to tell you that to please to switch off microphone, and that you'll be able to ask questions at the end of the talk. What can I say more about introduction? That so we'll be starting in a minute. So John is John, you are presently responsible for the Planetary Environment Facility in Aarhus University in Denmark. But before you start to do space science, you had a background in atomic physics and cryogenics, but you started to do some alien studies in this with this in this tunnel 25 years ago, and
By
so to
accident, really.
what by
By
accident.
accident, yes.
All right, but we all have interesting and accidents in our life, so that we our trajectory is it goes in one or another direction. And so today you are going to present to us uh, several examples of this of what can be done with this wind tunnel, and also maybe emphasize what is nice with this tunnel, what are the difficulties, and how to proceed. Okay, thank you, John. The screen is yours now.
Thanks. Uh, so, yeah, the purpose of our lab really was initially to try to recreate other planets in the lab, um, and do this in order to study them, to try and explain the observations we make in space and on other planetary bodies in our solar system. So we began as a research project. But back in 2007, we got funding from the European Space Agency, ESA, to build a larger chamber, which we did. And since then, we've been running it as a facility, which means that although I do have students and we do university type research, most of our time over the past 15 odd years has been in collaboration, which means that groups come to us, we collaborate for a week or maybe a few weeks on research projects. They may become with their instruments, their expertise, and we obviously have our facility. And we normally do this with various kinds of funding, but only that we perform also industrial contracts, which I won't tell you about. And I won't tell you really about the kind of research that I've been doing with my students. So I run this lab together with Jakob Iversen. He's technically responsible for the lab. And Kel Rasmussen, who you may know, he is more an Aeolian person than I am. I don't really have that kind of background. He's an emeritus professor in geoscience, so I'm in physics, but he has a wind tunnel in our lab. You're looking at a very old picture of it. So this is what you might call an open circuit boundary layer wind tunnel. So he can study sand transport in that. I am also not going to tell you about his research. He should rather do that. But yeah, we work closely together, us three, and we basically run the lab together. So as I mentioned, we do have industrial contracts with ISAR and occasionally with NESA, which I won't tell you about at all. Um, Most of our research projects, as I said, are funded by some kind of EU network. So I'll mention quite a lot, a whole series of research projects that were funded through Europlanet. Europlanet is a European planetology network. It was funded 3 times by the EU, each for 4 years. And we performed what's known as transnational access. Of the 40 essentially science projects that we've carried out in the past 15 years, probably more than half of them, almost 30 probably, have been funded through Europlanet. I will mention a couple of other EU networks in a minute. So what's special about our facility, our chamber? Uh, It is that it's not just a thermal vacuum chamber. So it is a vacuum chamber. We can pump our atmosphere out, and either do vacuum or refill it with some other gas. We also have temperature control systems, so essentially cryogenic systems. We can, in principle, cool the whole inner chamber down. We don't, but we rarely do this. It's tricky, but we very often deal with ices and whatnot, so we have some cryogenic systems. It's and what's very unique about our system is that you can see on the right-hand picture on the left-hand side, which is slightly off screen, that section of the wind tunnel is essentially two large fans which can recirculate air atmosphere within the chamber. So we can generate wind, and once you can generate wind, you can transport sand and dust. And this is essentially our major uh, research project. It's certainly what makes us special. And what so sometimes we run at low pressure, but even at 1 bar, uh, something that we can do, which is unusual and useful, is that we can safely study dust transport. We can do it safely because no matter how much dust we generate, uh, um, we can always pump the chamber completely empty. And once you do that, then the dust is immobilized and then it's essentially safe. Um, so what you see on the left is that sometimes we run with a completely open wind tunnel. We can only get up to maybe 16 meters per second doing that. So we can simulate the range of wind speeds, for example, on Mars, but not higher. We made this kind of narrow section to increase the wind speed, and that allows us to study uh, sand transport. So we can get, for most pressures, we can get up to twice the threshold, the static threshold for saltation. So yeah, a few statistics about the chamber. It's now 42 cubic meters. The silver section you see kind of stuck in the middle that looks a bit odd with the open door. That's completely new. That's a new section. Um, we only just installed it about 7 weeks ago. Uh, yeah, so that's it. It's basically designed to do some of the newer studies that we've been getting involved in. What's also new is that on the right-hand side of the photo, you can see a new pumping station, which allows us to go to even lower pressures. So now we can go to about 10 to minus 4 millibar, um, which is essentially vacuum with respect to granular transport. So dust grains, they will always be ballistic at those pressures. There is no aerodynamic drag anymore. I mentioned temperature and wind speed. We can also control humidity. Um, what's maybe just as important as the uniqueness of our chamber wind tunnel is that we have a series of different techniques, some of which techniques that we've bought, but also ones that we've developed ourselves. Now I'll try to mention most of these. So most of my talk will be um, presenting a few various collaborative research projects, mostly funded through Europlanet, and some of these technologies that we've used and or developed. So you may know what a laser Doppler velocimeter is. It's essentially a flow sensor that works by detecting dust or sand grain velocities. Um, this is extremely useful. It's extremely useful for calibrating other wind sensors, for example. We use high-speed cameras. I'll show you some movies later on. We often use webcams, arrays of webcams sometimes, and often use laser sheets. Um, and some two new techniques that we've been developing, which we are now using and are super useful. We are very happy about them. We developed a new micro pitot array. So it's essentially a pitot tube array. That's to say we can measure the boundary layer wind flow. So yeah, we can essentially get U star, for example, out of it. And we've developed a new what we call an opacity system, which is essentially a laser transmission sensor detector, which can determine grain concentration, either dust or sand. So I'll tell you a little bit more about them later on. This is a list of a few, not all, but a few projects that visitors that we've had. Some of them have been to us several times. Many of them are not Aeolian people. Some of them are, and some of them do Aeolian work, but are not involved in the Aeolian community. For example, several of them are volcanologists, so they study ash, resuspension, transport, and several of them are what you might call planetologists. So again, doing Aeolian work, but not really being in the community. So yeah, we were funded at some point by the EU in two different networks, one of them volcanology and one of them to do with essentially Mars. So I'll mention those a bit later. So sadly, recently, the EU stopped funding transnational access activities. So we don't have any more guests, visitors, collaborators funded through Europlanet. Even Europlanet is still alive. They still run a conference and they run a society, but they don't have EU funding. But happily for us, we have now come on a list, a rather short list of ESA ground-based facilities, which means that you can apply to ESA, the European Space Agency, for funding to visit us for up to 5 weeks. And we just last week finished our very first one of these visits by a group in Utrecht. They were studying essentially sublimation-driven avalanches on Mars and other planetary bodies. Yeah, so yeah, they were here for 5 weeks, funded through ESA. It went very well. So a lot of the motivation for both our planetologist friends and also for quite a few Aeolian researchers for low pressure sand and dust transport is the fact that you see sand and dust transport uh, on Mars. Since the 70s, it's been known that dust is actively transported. It's not difficult to see. The picture you see of Mars in the background there, you can see the atmosphere. It's why it's a pretty cool photo. You can see the orange atmosphere full of dust. And the two photos on the right are before and during a global dust storm. So dust is actively transported, and it was a bit of a mystery even back then, in the sense that the pressure on Mars, the gas density is about a factor of 100 lower than our atmosphere, but the wind speeds are, if anything, lower. Uh, so yeah, it becomes a little difficult to understand why there is so much active dust transport. And more recently, uh, recently meaning maybe 15 years ago, it was discovered that there's quite a lot of active sand transport as well. The orbital photos you can see there, you can see some dark dunes. They're dark because they're free of dust, which is light colored, and they're free of dust because they've been actively saltating recently. Um, so we were involved in this roadmap EU network, which focused on understanding and explaining dust transport on Mars with a very specific focus of trying to develop a new and better Mars analog dust. Um, so it was a group of global circulation modelers and a group that does observations on Mars and a group that actually made some new dust and ourselves who did wind tunnel experiments. So this is a movie. What you're looking at here is from above, you're looking at about a 1 meter section of our wind tunnel. It's essentially a glued sand bed, so an immobile sand bed with a very thick layer of dust on it. And then we're blowing with wind from right to left, um, while also using our opacity sensor system to measure dust resuspension. Uh, so this was interesting in the sense that it showed that dust can be transported at relatively low wind speeds on Mars, but not really much lower than the expected static saltation threshold. So not very low wind speeds. And we saw that the efficiency of this process is not high. It does resuspend some dust, but not a lot. As you can see, most of it kind of gets removed, but doesn't really go anywhere. Incidentally, there have been seen the Americans call these little things dust bunnies, the little things that roll around. They have actually been observed on Mars, so it's not totally fake. The next movie you're going to see, a bit more tricky to see what's happening, but this is a mobile sand bed, which we again have deposited dust on. And then we're turning the wind speed up until we go over the saltation threshold. And then the sand begins to transport. So it cleans itself essentially and becomes the quartz-like color at the end. Yeah, it's tricky to see because there's not a big difference in color between the Mars dust analog and the other. But we did discover one thing doing this, and that is that even though it's effective at removing the dust in a sense, uh, it doesn't resuspend a huge fraction of it. A lot of it, even after 1 meter, is still stuck to the sand. Clearly, after a longer period of saltation, it will be clean eventually. But and this is much more effective at resuspending dust than the direct dust resuspension. So yeah, this is the first of the Europlanet networks funded projects. You know Philippe Claudin and Bruno Andreotti. So they've been visiting us twice now. This was the first visit. It's been published. Uh, if you want to know details about there and other visits, you should really ask the actual authors. So normally I've taken the authors from either a publication they've made or the report that they presented to Europlanet. So all the reports from Europlanet, they're stored, they're open access because it's EU funded. Um, and so I'm allowed to sort of show photos and whatnot because it's all open access. Um, yeah, so they made some interesting discoveries. They saw that at lower pressure, there was indeed a reduction in the saltation threshold with respect to what they expected. Um, it sort of happened around 100 millibars and ended up being considerably lower down at Martian and slightly less lower pressures than that. Um, so this is a good thing in terms of explaining why there's sand transport on Mars, but maybe not. Uh, we still don't exactly know why this happens, and I think that's still true today. Uh, so yeah, on the right, there's just a photo of some ripples generated at Martian conditions, which interestingly look a lot like they do at ambient terrestrial conditions. So this is a movie taken with one of our webcams in the wind tunnel um, while it's running, and a very cool technique that Philippe and Bruno developed was a kind of new way of determining the threshold, the saltation threshold, friction velocity. That is by instead of just looking by eye and using some subjective method of counting grains or whatever. Um, they actually analyzed these webcam photos where the grains are illuminated by a laser sheet. And if you do some analysis on them, looking at light intensity, you can get the grain concentration. And you can then plot the grain concentration as a function of U star and then measure far above threshold and then extrapolate back to zero. You see that in the top right-hand figure. This works very well, and we love this technique. It's very quantitative and not at all subjective. So yes, this is a good technique which we still use. We still use it now. So I don't really have a good excuse for showing this movie other than that I really like it. And it's a kind of segue into the next section, next series of talks, which will be um, about saltation impact ripples. So what you're looking at is about a 5 centimeter long section of the sand bed taken through a digital microscope. So this is kind of very slightly time lapse, not highly time lapse, but a little bit time lapse movie. So you can see they start off as being rather shorter wavelength and become longer with time. I like it because you can see the individual grains as well as see the ripples. So this is one of the this is another guest from an institute in Naples. They've been to our lab many times doing various different activities. In this case, they were part of quite a large international kind of team looking not just at impact ripples, but aerodynamic or hydrodynamic ripples. So you can see in these photos, there are short wavelength ripples, and then there are longer wavelength ones. And by far the easiest way to see these is with a movie. When you watch a movie, you can see that they sort of don't move in the same way. The impact ripples seem to kind of move through the through the aerodynamic ripples in an interesting way. And this is kind of characteristic of this. So yeah, that this has been published, but I believe the work is continuing. There's a more recent publication from a group in the States studying these aerodynamic ripples. Um, so yeah, Aurora Colette, she was a PhD student of Sabrina Carpi from Nantes in France. They used a technique which a lot of our visitors have used called photogrammetry. It involves taking photos from different angles, and then you can use this to try to make a 3D recreation of, for example, ripples in their case. So they were studying kind of the small scale structure of ripples using photogrammetry. She came with some friends you may know Alexander Valance and co-workers. I think they're at Rennes. Yeah, so they drove some sand up all the way from France. Yeah, and yet another t ripple type of experiment, which again involves studying ripples, but also in kind of a slight with a slight twist. Um, this was a group from Delft in Holland. Interestingly, Sebastian de Vet, he came as a master student 20 years ago to do a project, and now he came tw 20 years later with his own master student. So his idea was that if the grains are not spherical, then they may have some kind of orientation due to the wind, and he was sort of looking at that. So very much the microstructure of ripples. So sometimes we would take the whole sand bed out and take samples. I think he also used photogrammetry. Um, yeah. So this was rather different experiment. We don't normally have biologists in our lab. Lorenzo is essentially a biologist, but also a planetologist. So his interest here was in abrasion removal, abrasion induced by saltation, and then transport of fungal spores. So he came with some rocks, which he painted with fungal spores, and then put them in on our sand bed, and then we exposed them to saltation, and then his hope was that they get abraded, and some of this material gets removed, and yeah, then he can detect it by taking samples. And it worked in a sense that, yes, there was abrasion and the fungal spores were removed. Um, I like these movies because, yes, we don't really do this kind of thing. Uh, there's a nice deflation you can see in the lower film. Um, yeah, they're a lot of fun, these these kind of experiments. So Maren Jones, you probably don't know her, even though she does quite a lot of Aeolian type work. She runs a group in Manchester, and their group is funded at least partially by Rolls-Royce. So Rolls-Royce, they make jet engines. Their interest is uh, resuspension of dust and sand, then getting into their engines, which is why they fund them. So they came and did a whole series of rather different kinds of experiments, both running in Kells wind tunnel and mine. The picture you see on the left-hand side uh, is if you kind of squint, you can see that the top of the ripples kind of look a bit greenish. And that's because this is a mixture of different minerals, and the greenish ones are olivine, which get kind of segregated out due to the fact that they're more dense than the blackish stuff, which I can't remember what was, but is a lighter mineral dust sand. Um, so yeah, her interest was looking at the minerals with different densities and how that then affects both detachment and saltation. And during these tests, she came with her own aerosol detectors, some PM10 and PM2.5 commercial detectors for aerosols. And also she made her own sensors. You can see those in the middle photo, bottom photo. They're basically tubes with filters on the back that she sucks with a vacuum system. So yeah, taking air samples and then she can collect the dust and or sand. Um, so this project was interesting because it gave us a chance to try a opacity system, not with dust, which is what it was originally designed for, but also to detect sand grain concentration. So this was the first sand grain concentration determined with a primitive prototype opacity system. Interestingly, we measured sand grain concentrations during saltation of several hundred per cubic centimeter. That was a lot, which I still think is a lot. So this was an experiment they were doing using our techniques of putting dust on top of sand and then performing saltation and then looking at the resuspension of the dust. It's a better movie in a sense because you can see the different there's a bit bigger color contrast. So this is one of several groups that we've been involved in many times. Uh, Jacopo and Beta have been to our lab many times doing various different projects, but all related to volcanology. So they are volcanologists. They work in several networks of volcanologists, which we also were kind of involved in for many years. What you're looking at is a little bit interesting in the sense that they made their own field wind tunnel. So this is a very small field wind tunnel seen from above in time lapse where we were testing and calibrating it basically. Uh, and what they did with this field wind tunnel was they would take it out close to an active volcano and do measurements on very new deposited uh, uh, ash, volcanic ash. Uh, you may not know. So the motivation here is that most human illness caused by volcanoes is not during the eruption, it's due to aeolian resuspension of ash afterwards, sometimes years later. Uh, this ash is very harmful if you breathe it in. Um, so there's a lot of motivation in understanding and obviously trying to mitigate this. So another time that Jacopo and Beta were visiting us, you can see the photo in the middle there. There is where they are at an active volcanic site, taking samples and or with their wind tunnel. They are a bit crazy, volcanologists, it has to be said. Another time that they came, they did an interesting experiment, which is published. Which is they varied the relative humidity in our chamber. We can, in principle, vary it between 0 and 100%. And they were seeing at what point do you see effects of humidity? And interestingly, they found that you don't really see any effect until you get above about 90% relative humidity. At that point, presumably you get monolayers of water and then you get a huge increase in cohesion. So you see a very big increase in the detachment threshold. So this is another volcanology group in Geneva. They've also we've worked with them many times. They've been to our lab many times doing various different studies. As I mentioned, one technique that a lot of our visitors use and one that we use ourselves, we have a high-speed camera. They came with a better high-speed camera. I can't remember what movie you're looking at, but it's clearly a volcanic material with a broad size distribution, so not really very good for studying saltation or anything, but um, yeah, so normally what you do with these movies is you can perform particle tracking or you can do PIV, which is a related technique. You can get commercial software to do PIV analysis on a film like this. Yeah, so the pictures on the left, you can see their high-speed camera, but they also came with also some essentially dust aerosol detectors, PM10, whatever. And we also used our sand traps. So I haven't mentioned them before. They're very old school and very old. They're Kells from about 20, 30 years ago. But they still work very well. So obviously they don't have great height resolution, but they work very well. We use them, yeah, often, I would say. So this next project was again rather different in that it involved ice grains. So this was a group in Bern who specialize in making um, sand-sized water ice spherical droplets, particles. Um, So this was a really tricky experiment in the sense that it required us to cool the whole inner chamber down to well below zero, as well as controlling the sand-covered glued plate that you're looking at on the right. The one on the left is the same, it's just a different kind of sand we've glued on the surface. So then we prepare this granular ice, and then we deposit it on the surface. We then pump it down to Martian conditions, and we blow wind on it and perform detachment threshold measurements. It worked, but it was very difficult. Water ice is very tricky. It it tends to be cohesive and and can melt. It's rather nasty. But yeah, it's I I I would say this study it did work, and there is interested in doing similar type of experiments in the future. Um, yeah, so this is a recent photo showing a newly developed pitot tube array and uh, what we call our opacity array system. So essentially, the opacity array system consists of a series of eight uh, laser sheets, which we shine from one side of the wind tunnel, and then there are a series of photodetectors, uh, one for each laser sheet. The photodetectors are about a square millimeter. So that's kind of our spatial resolution in height. Um, yeah, and we basically measure the amount of light which gets from one side of the wind tunnel to the other. Uh, Clearly, if there's dust or sand, that amount of light will go down. Uh, and yeah, interestingly, with sand transport, so that the speed of this system is about six kilohertz, which is fast enough that we can actually detect single grains of sand. So we can come right down to that we see individual sand grains being transported. Now this is super good for looking at yeah, slightly below threshold and then going through threshold. And another good thing about this system is that it can also measure at very high concentrations. It can measure at above 1,000 grains per cubic centimeter, which is a lot. It means that only a very tiny amount of light actually gets all the way through. So the two plots you see on the right-hand side, this is while we're running. The upper one is an example of extreme kind of bursting. So presumably this was kind of high pressure, probably close to threshold. Um, it's kind of inverse in the sense that as the spikes go up, it means there's less light getting through. Uh, but you see, it's very bursty. Uh, so these bursts are presumably like just a few seconds long. And yeah, so this is in contrast to the plot on below it, which is at lower pressure. Uh, and you can see that the bursting has gone away, presumably due to recirculation of sand grains, kind of causes essentially self-feeding going on. So they're a lot more stable, the bursting has gone away, and you get a kind of very clear signal. If you average over that, you will get a decent average value of the average sand concentration at that height for that detector. So this is an example of a data series taken with our pitot tube array, our micro pitot tube array. The functionality of these micro pitot tubes that we've been working on for many years, in fact, is published. The reference is there. Uh, so there are two major advantages for us for these micro pitot tubes. One is that they don't really block due to sand grains. They're so small. You can see there's a microscope picture on the right. The outer diameter of the pitot tube is zero point 0.4 millimeters. Uh, yeah, we essentially have only seen one time that one has blocked. So compared to larger pitot tubes, they can run in very active saltation, very close to the bed. Uh, so we can measure, uh, yeah, wind profiles accurately, very close to the bed during highly active saltation. Uh, so that's one benefit. Another one is that at low pressure, you go into the essentially Stokes drag regime for these pitot tubes, and they function essentially independent of pressure. So you get a great enhancement in signal compared to if they were running, um, uh, yeah, if they were larger scale ones and their Reynolds number was large. Um, so there's an example of a data set in the below it where we start at 0 wind speeds, we turn the wind on and measure for some minutes or a couple of minutes and then switch it off again. You can get really good. We're very happy about this sensor array. You can get very accurate wind profiles out of it. Um, so our goals for the future, for next year, essentially, I have a master's student. I have one now, which is finishing, and he did some measurements with the opacity system in the micro pitot tube array. So we think that they are essentially up and running systems. Uh, we have an LDV, but a combination of these gives you an awful lot of information about the saltating grains. It can give you the wind boundary layer, the grain concentration, and if you use the laser Doppler velocimeter, you can get the grain velocities as well, all simultaneously in principle. We haven't done this yet. We would uh, we would like to try next year, I think. And as a complement to these technologies, we've been developing a sand feeding system. Uh, it is working. We do have it. It's not very advanced quite yet. It doesn't feed the sand in a good way, and we can't really reduce it to very low feed rates, which we'd like to do. Um, but we are close. We'll probably have a good sand feeding system next year. Okay, thank you.
You. Thank you very much, John. Uh, I This is a nice talk. I'm always very impressed by the spectrum of the all the different scientific questions that you can address with this facility, and also that it involves both scientific questions and also technical development, which is also essential in your work. And this is a nice combination, I think. Do you have questions in the audience? I can see a long question from Thomas about the threshold in the chat, about the threshold that we measure some years ago. I guess this is more a question for me than
Yeah,
for John. In a few words, because this is your talk, John. So, but just in a few words, I think yes, you're right, Thomas. I think we measure still a threshold that is in fact too high. The real threshold should be even lower, and this was partly due to probably to the recirculation system of the tunnel. So we should be a bit careful with these measurements. Probably. Do you want to comment more, Thomas? Or...
No, when you say so, that's good to hear because then
Yes,
there's
in
still
fact,
open question.
the second week that we come to Aarhus, we did another series of experiments where the feeder was there, and then we could reach more reliable, steady conditions of transport, and we measured the flux in the full flux
Hmm.
curve. which we can extrapolate to zero. We can extrapolate to zero, and that gave lower values. So this is still unpublished. Unfortunately, we have too many papers late, but we would
How
find.
much lower? How much lower? I wonder.
I, I, I forgot now.
Approxim
I should check.
approximately.
A lot.
Mm.
I don't know, factor of two, maybe lower. I forgot.
That wouldn't be enough. The point is you need something like factor of five
Okay.
Yes,
at least.
it was a lot. It was more like a factor of 5. It
was
was more
it?
than a
Was it?
factor. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Ah,
We
okay.
will. I know we should work on this on this data, and like we can discuss this.
Hmm.
Other questions from the audience about the many things that have been presented by John?
Maybe I have a question.
Yes, please.
Nice presentation, by the way, John. I was curious about the humidity you mentioned in the tunnel. You mentioned that you, if I recall correctly, that you changed the humidity between 0 and 100%. So would the tunnel be able to handle like moist sands as well? Have there been any experiments on moisture in the bed?
But that would not be difficult
Okay.
for us. Yeah.
Yeah. I might be interested uh, to yeah to work on that, because in Twente University in the Netherlands we're developing a wind tunnel, and there we plan to look at mainly the initiation of transport, so also an open wind tunnel just on atmospheric pressure. It's a short section, so we can't look at full development of transport, but yeah, we're relatively new on experiments, so we might be interested to
Yeah.
look at,
High,
for example, this feeder as well. And
yeah. So high humidity is a little bit tricky, but not well, it's just messy, I would say. Not not tricky. If you put enough water in there in the chamber, then the humidity gets to 100%, and then it stays there. Doesn't have anywhere to go. The inner chamber is designed to be fairly robust. We've even had salt water in there,
oh, okay, cool.
which can be quite corrosive. Uh, so yeah, most surfaces inside are stainless steel or aluminium, and they're pretty robust.
Yeah, recently a PhD candidate of mine did some DEM simulations on moist sands, but then, well, in reality, you often get evaporation, but that might be a really nice opportunity then, that if you have 100% humidity, that you can cancel that effect roughly. Could be an interesting one. Thanks.
Thank you, Gert. Any other questions? I I may have another one if nobody. So in the first movie that you've shown about the dust, it looks like dust aggregates in some little piles or something. Can you confirm this, or this what
Yeah,
we expect from for erosion of very small grains, that they not only you erode them but you accumulate them in.
yeah. So when you get down to micron-sized grains, they become very cohesive. Uh, so what we observed, which is interesting, is if you deposit a monolayer of dust on top of the immobile sand, it's extremely difficult to remove by wind. Impossible, I would say, at any reasonable wind speeds. But once you have that monolayer of dust on it, then a thicker layer, many monolayers. So the one you saw was maybe 30 monolayers or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, they form kind of a lattice, and then they clump together in aggregates. The wind turbulence even encourages these aggregates, and then they get removed as aggregates in kind of like, yeah, almost sand grain sized clumps.
Oh, so you actually erode the aggregates of the dust more than
Yeah,
the dust itself or something.
the
Huh?
aggregates are, yes,
I
the
see.
dust is removed as aggregates, and
I
yeah,
see.
so
I
you
see.
get this rolling things. Yeah, this was all in my my first 10 years of doing trying to simulate Mars. This was my sort of working theory that this would explain why dust is transported at so low wind speeds on Mars, but it's not true. It doesn't really explain it in a sense that the threshold is not super low, and it's not an efficient technique method of resuspending grains. They tend to be removed, yes, but then they roll around a bit. They don't actually. You do get some which are lifted and break up and then liberate fine grains, but it's not an efficient process.
I see.
I now think that I agree with what everybody else nearly always thought, which is that it is saltation-induced resuspension of dust that occurs on Mars. This is the major process.
I see. Any last questions for John before we stop? Everybody's shy, apparently.
Stop sharing.
Yeah, so could you please show
Oh.
again the announcement? So before we shut down, we stop this session. Please register for the next Virtuaeolian seminar in January, the end of January. Josh Caster will give his talk. He was initially planned to present in October, but due to the shutdown in the US, his talk was cancelled, so it has been rescheduled at the end of January. Please register. Please also, be sure that you receive the announcement of ISAR regarding the newsletters, where we not only have advertisements for these seminars, but also various informations about the next conference ICAR in Namibia, and several interesting informations, nominations for awards, various conferences, postdoc opportunities, and everything. So please register to this newsletter to get the info. And yes, and after, so with the program for these seminars after from February on is still under progress, and we'll disseminate the information later on. Thank you very much, John. Thomas, you wanted to say something?
Just a question about the time. Is it a China-friendly time? 8 a.m. MST, I don't know.
Say this again. I didn't understand.
So is the 8 a.m. MST, is this China-friendly? So is this, or is it somewhere in the night?
Okay. So probably not. So yeah. So the time of these seminars is always an issue, right? Because basically we are spread over the whole planet. So there is no way that the time is convenient for the Americas, the Europe and Asia and Australia. So we try to vary from time to time. Today was convenient for both Europe and Asia, not for the US, I guess, because this person is American. It would be good for America, and 8 a.m. America is typically in the afternoon in Europe, so it's probably a bit late for China. However, all of these talks are recorded and can be found on the website of ISAR, and you can look at them afterwards. And we encourage you to do so. But yes, the time of these seminars, it's always difficult to accommodate everyone. Okay. I'll stop the recording now. I wish you good day, good evening, good morning, whatever wherever you are, and hope to see you soon for another ISAR seminar. Thank you.